If you thought buying a $1 million home was out of reach without a massive deposit, I'm about to show you how the government's latest changes to the First Home Guarantee Scheme could get you into that home with just $50,000 down. And if you're thinking, Jason, that sounds too good to be true, I get it. But here's what's actually happening right now. The government just removed the income caps, unlimited the spots, and cranked up the price limits. What used to require you to save 200 grand for a 20% deposit can now be done with $50,000 plus costs. I'm Jason Kwan. I'm a mortgage broker who's helped hundreds of Australians navigate exactly this situation. I worked in commercial property research with CBRE and Colliers. I was previously a buyer's agent, worked as a head of credit as a lender, and supported award-winning brokerages in scaling up. So I get how the banks think, and more importantly, I know how to make this work for people like you. But here's the thing, and this is critical. While this scheme has opened doors that were locked shut just months ago, it's also created a feeding frenzy. More buyers with more buying power are chasing the same properties. So if you're thinking about using this, timing matters. In the next few minutes, I'm going to break down exactly how this scheme works, who qualifies now that the rules have changed, and most importantly, the impact of it on the property market. Let me start with saying that the 5% deposit scheme has already existed for years, but there were quite a few barriers to entry. On the 1st of October this year, the government removed those barriers by making 3 massive changes that completely rewrote who can use the scheme. First, and this is a big one, they removed the income caps entirely. Before the 1st of October, if you were single and earned more than $125,000, or if you were a couple earning more than $200,000 combined, you were locked out. Now you could earn $500,000 and still qualify. The only thing that matters is you haven't owned property in the last 10 years. Second, they made the spots unlimited. There used to be around 35,000 spots per year with waiting lists. Now it's just first come, first served with no cap. Third, they jacked up the property price thresholds. In Melbourne, it went from $800,000 to $950,000. In Sydney, it's now $1.5 million, and in Brisbane, it's $1 million. Now, I'll mention that you've always been able to put down a 5% deposit. Banks will take it. The scheme did not invent the 5% deposit option. What it did was remove the cost that came with it. When you borrow more than 80% of a property's value, banks see you as high risk, so they charge you lender's mortgage insurance, or LMI. The insurance that protects them, not you, if you cannot make repayments. On a $1 million property with a 5% deposit, you're looking at around 30 to 40 grand in LMI. This scheme changes that by having the government step in as a guarantor for the portion between 80% and 95% LVR. The bank does not need LMI anymore, so you don't pay it. Without LMI, the 5% option becomes a lot more manageable for prospective buyers. Let me show you what this looks like in practice with a $1 million property in Victoria. The price cap is $950,000, but we'll use 1 mil for simplicity. If you were buying with a 20% deposit, you'd need 200 grand up front just for the deposit. And then there's stamp duty, which in Victoria on a $1 million property is around $55,000. Add in your other costs like conveyancing, building inspections, and settlement fees. You're looking at another 5 to 10 grand. The total upfront cost would then become around $270,000. Now, if you tried to buy that same property with a 5% deposit, but without the scheme, you would need $50,000 for the deposit. Stamp duty and other costs stay the same, so that's still around $60,000 to $65,000. But here's where it gets expensive. Because you're borrowing 95% of the property value, the bank charges you lender's mortgage insurance. On a $950,000 loan for a $1 million property, LMI is going to cost you somewhere between 30 grand to 40 grand. You're looking at a total upfront cost of $150,000 to $160,000. So yes, you saved $120,000 on the deposit compared to the 20% option, but you've just spent $40,000 on LMI. On the new scheme with a 5% deposit, you need 50 grand for the deposit, same stamp duty and cost, so around 60 to 65 grand in total. But here's the difference, no LMI. The government guarantee removes that $40,000 cost entirely. Your total upfront cost is around $115,000. That's $150,000 less than the 20% deposit option and $40,000 less than doing a 5% deposit without the scheme. The LMI waiver is what makes this scheme worth using. There are still a few eligibility boxes that you have to tick, so I will run you through those quickly. First, you qualify if you're an Australian citizen or a permanent resident. You're at least 18 and you haven't owned property anywhere in the world for the last 10 years. That includes investment properties. You can apply on your own or jointly with another person, which doesn't have to be your spouse anymore. It can be a friend, family member, business partner, whoever. Other than that, you need at least 5% deposit plus costs. You're buying to live in it, not an investment, and the property has to be under the price cap for your area. And even though it's a lower deposit requirement, the bank still assess you the same way they always have. The scheme guarantees a portion above 80% of the loan, but you still need to prove that you can afford the repayments for the entire amount. The scheme helps reduce your deposit, but if your income doesn't service a $950,000 loan, or if your credit history is messy, you'll still get rejected. I see people assume that because they qualify for the scheme, they're automatically approved for the loan. That's not how it works. Another thing I have to caution that the government does not necessarily advertise, but something you have to keep in mind. You can't just rock up with 5% and keep the rest of your money in the back pocket. If the bank can see that you've got 200 grand sitting in an offset account, they'll want you to put most of it in. You might keep 30 grand as a buffer, but the rest goes towards the purchase. The scheme is designed for people who genuinely can't save the full 20%, not for those who just don't want to use their money. Besides that, I also want to explain the reality of what this scheme is going to do to the property market. Essentially, every buyer who qualifies for this scheme just got their buying power boosted by 100 grand to 150 grand overnight. And they're all chasing the same properties. I had a client last month looking at a property listed for $850,000. By the time they were ready to make an offer 3 weeks later, similar properties in the area were selling for $950,000. That's not a coincidence. Here's the simple math. More buyers, same amount of properties, higher prices. The property that would have costed you 800 grand in September might cost you 900 grand today. So yes, your deposit requirement dropped from $260,000 to $110,000, but the property itself cost 100 grand more. So basically you can enter the market, but it's even more competitive than before. I'll give you my honest take on all of this. If you qualify for the scheme, if you can comfortably afford the repayments, and if you're planning to live in the property for at least 3 to 5 years, yes, I think you should use it. And here's why. People have been talking about property crashes for the last 20 years. I've seen dips, I've seen stagnant periods, but I haven't seen a major crash in Australia. Not like the US subprime crisis during the GFC. The worst ever collapse was in the 1890s, where prices fell more than 50% in Melbourne. In the late 1970s, Melbourne property prices fell by roughly 25%. And in the early 1990s and the 2008 global financial crisis, property prices fell by about 10%. The best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago. The second best time is now. Same with property. I had a client in 2019 who was convinced prices were about to crash. He had his deposit ready, he was pre-approved, but he wanted to wait for the market to drop. 3 years later, the same properties he was looking at had gone up by 40%. His deposit, which would have bought him a nice 3-bedroom house in 2019, could barely get him a 2-bedroom unit by 2022. The scheme isn't perfect. You're borrowing more money, so your repayments are higher. If property prices do drop and you've only got 5% equity, you could end up in negative equity, and you cannot convert it to an investment property until the government guarantee is discharged. But if you're going to live in it and you can afford the repayments, and if the alternative is waiting another 3 to 5 years to save a full deposit, while prices potentially keep rising, the math makes sense. Having said that, if you're going to use this scheme, here are 2 things you must absolutely get right. First, budget properly. Don't borrow the maximum just because you can. Work backwards from what you can comfortably afford in repayments. If you can handle $4,000 a month, stick to that, whether it's 95% of the property value or 65%. Your actual affordability does not change just because the bank will lend you more. Remember, interest rates could go up, your income could change. Life happens, but make sure you've got breathing room. Second, move fast, but move smart. This market is moving quickly. Properties that would have sat on the market for 6 to 8 weeks are now selling in 2 to 3 weeks. But don't let urgency make you make a decision that isn't backed by data. Know the market before you start looking. Understand what properties in your target area have sold in the last 3 months, not what they're listed for. Get your pre-approval sorted before you start shopping. And when you find the right property, be ready to move. That triangle still applies. Price, location, property type. You can only have 2. If you want a perfect location and a perfect property type, you pay more. If you want a perfect location and a perfect price, you'll have to compromise on property type. Know what you're willing to give up before you start looking. So those are my thoughts. The scheme has opened doors, but it's also created new challenges. The market's moving fast, the rules are complex, and the stakes are high. If you're thinking about using this scheme, the most important thing you can do right now is understand where you stand. What can you actually afford? What do you qualify for? What's realistic in your target area given the current market conditions? If you need help answering any of these questions, I've left a link in the bio to book a call. Otherwise, make sure to subscribe for more insights on navigating this market, and I'll see you in the next video.